How is it going, Exile? So today I want to talk about my feedback for the current 0.3 league. What did I play? How did it go? What would I like for future leagues? What do I think the state of the game is? Etc, etc. So don't want to drag this introduction out for too long, just summarizing. I think this league was an amazing league. It was by far the best league we ever had. I think it was very well executed. Everything was working just great. Of course, there was a couple of issues we're going to go over a little bit later. But again, I don't want to drag this out for too long. So let's just go over what we're going to cover in this video. First, we're going to talk about my league start, early game campaign and stuff like that. Next, we're going to talk about the abyssal mechanic itself. Then we're going to talk a little bit about crafting. Then we're going to talk about the class imbalance, specifically the imbalance of caster characters here. Then a little bit why items are way too powerful compared to the passive tree, and also why ascendancies have essentially become just stat sticks at the current iteration of the game. And last but not least, we're gonna have a little outro with my plans for the upcoming season and what you're going to expect from my future coverage, what classes I'm gonna play, etc, etc. And as always, make sure to check the description down below. If you want to go to a specific section of this video, just use the links in the description down below. And without further ado, let's start with how did my league start go, what did I play, and what concerns do I have for the early game, the state of the early game, and the campaign. So here's my thoughts on the current state of the campaign and the early game in general. So first of all, I feel like a lot of zones of the campaigns are still too large. I think especially in Act 3 and Act 4, the zones are sometimes just way too large. Some zones of Act 2 are too large. Act 1 is actually pretty much fine, but I feel like sometimes you're stuck in a zone and you have to like kind of, search for something specific for like 10 minutes or something like that straight. And I feel like this just feels a little bit too long. So I would love if these zones could be sized down just a little bit in general. Besides that, I really like the campaign, I really like the boss fights, I really like the current state of the difficulty. Maybe the difficulty of the campaign could be increased just slightly in the terms of survivability of bosses especially. But overall, I don't have too many complaints about that at all. What I have complaints about though is the early game skill and class balance. There's just specific builds which are completely out-dominating other builds in the early game. There's just skills which are completely unviable in the early game. And also probably completely unviable in the late game. But I feel like if you're running through the game, especially if you're like a new player or something, then, if you pick the wrong skill and it's simply not going to be possible to get through the campaign with the wrong skill you've picked, then there's something wrong. It is just too punishing for experimenting. So even as me, as like an, experienced PoE II player, I'm not the most experienced PoE II player, but I would say I'm pretty experienced in PoE II. I kind of like the idea of the Stormweaver and all the infusions, so I started as a Stormweaver. And yes, I was able to make it through the campaign, but only by technically just ditching everything with the infusions and just go for Arc with the lightning infusions, because it just does like triple damage and a bunch of chains. But besides that, I completely ignored the infusion mechanic in the campaign because it was just too weak. It was not strong enough in the campaign to sustain. And other build types like, minions or like Essence Drain just had like so much more power in the campaign. Obviously the lightning arrow builds and stuff like that are like completely overpowered in the campaign, and especially the Stormweaver, it was just not. And then it kept continuing when reaching early endgame. The class was just weak. The power of the infusions basically just fell off completely. And I ended up re-rolling my starting character, which I had never done before. But I felt like, the Stormweaver is so weak, I just cannot make any great endgame build out of this. So I re-rolled to a bloodmage, which was a very good decision because the bloodmage is just completely overpowered this season. But yeah, so my primary concern is really, if GGG, you're listening to this, please just try to make all skills viable in the early game. They can fall off in the late game, it's not a problem. But if I pick my skill in the early game and it's just complete utter garbage, I should still be able to make it through the campaign. So the skills should have like a meaningful scaling. Stuff like Essence Drain in the campaign should be nerfed. It's just way too strong. Like, I don't see a reason to have like builds which fly through the campaign like crazy while having other skills which are just completely horrible. So yeah, we definitely need like a big pass on the skill balance for the early game. So I want to talk about the Abyss mechanic. So this is essentially the first real League mechanic coming to PoE II. And I feel like the execution and the relevance of this mechanic has been absolutely amazing. So having the Abyss on every map, there's something you can basically look forward, even search on every map if you want to. The rewards are really great, the increased currency drops and stuff like that feel really good. The new crafting currencies tied to the Abyss feel very good. The Abyssal mechanic with the unveiling, you know, having up to 6 tries to get the mod you want with like a little bit of a higher chance, even if you use like Essence of the Abyss. It feels really great overall. And I'm 100% sure this mechanic is gonna go core, because it's very short played, right? In the most cases, you're just gonna have an Abyssal Pip on the map, you just finish it real quick, it only takes like, you know, a couple of seconds, you know, 20, 30 seconds, whatever it may be. And then you're done, and you have, you know, the chance of dropping like those juicy Omen of Lights, which is gonna be probably worth way more when Abyss obviously goes core, because they're gonna be much more rare. So I feel like overall it's a very, very great mechanic. There's just some tiny things really which are not even so relevant, which I do not like. And first of all, that is the spawn time of the mobs. So if you have a very fast endgame build, you kind of have to like walk away from the pits, because it takes like 5 seconds or something like that for the mobs to fully spawn, and then you kind of go back to the pit and finish them up. And then, you know, it also takes again another like 2 to 3 seconds for the abyssal coffers like to spawn, to like lift up from the ground. I feel like these times are way too long. It's a little bit annoying in the late game. Same with Abyssal Depths, for example. Going into the Abyssal Depths, like the climbing animation, the landing animation, standing up and stuff like that, that just takes way too long. And it actually took so long that I, in the end, just ended up ditching these Abyssal Pits altogether, because I just didn't want to wait for like a 15-second animation and don't want to lose my buffs and stuff like that. But yeah, besides these minor issues, I'm like super happy with the Abyssal mechanic. Couldn't been much better, to be honest. And especially seeing like other games like D4, what they bring with their like their seasons. I feel like this was like such well executed of a season mechanic. So really, I couldn't have asked for much more in that regard. As for the crafting, we had a big problem in PoE II that the crafting, like the high tier crafting, was extremely expensive and really only accessible to maybe like 0.01% of the player base. This has completely shifted with the new patch, and I really like it. Is crafting at a perfect state right now? Not at all, but it is so much better than before. We basically now have deterministic crafting methods to craft, you know, the, let's say, the 80 percentile, you know, kind of gear. So, you know, for like a few divines or not even one divine, we can basically right now craft a gear which is, you know, almost perfect, like 80% perfect, not 90% perfect. There's still some RNG involved with like the whole crystallization, with, you know, consuming the quality for a chance to get something. There's, you know, a little bit RNG with the homogenizing exaltations, because, you know, there still might be like more mods with a tag on it. And but still, these crafting methods are relatively cheap, and it makes it much more easy to get the required gear to get your character going. Especially, for example, with the plus skills on items. Plus skills on items are just extremely important, and now we basically just have the new essence system. So we have essences to just slam the +3 skills on our items. Slamming a +3 on an amulet is super easy if you know how to do that. So, in general, I feel like the new crafting currencies are a great addition to the game. They are relatively accessible, they're relatively common, so for a player who invests a fairly good amount of time and research into the game, they are very great. However, they are not yet accessible to the newer player base, which is a little bit of, I would not say concerning, but I think this is something we could definitely work on making these more accessible. We still have to go to external websites, see the mod weighting and stuff like that, and I feel like with tooltips we can improve those items, and we could write on the item, you know, this might give you one of these 3 mods, so just basically like display a list of mods which a certain currency can get endgame, display like a list of omens, what they can be used with, maybe, you know, even add like help tooltips, like if you know, find an omen of homogenizing exaltations, maybe just give it a tooltip and say, you know what, this is the homogenizing exaltation, it's commonly used together with this, you know, blah blah blah. Maybe even link it to like a little video, a little guide or something like that. You know, just give like new players some more guidance on these things. I know we content creators do guides on YouTube, but not everybody's gonna watch that, and I feel like having a little bit more of an in-game tooltip for those crafting currencies would definitely be a great addition to the game, and I think it's not gonna be so much work to actually get that implemented. But overall, I feel like the new crafting stuff is a very big W for the game. I hope it's going to get improved. I hope we're going to get, you know, at least some more low tier crafting, like a crafting bench and stuff like that. Or, you know, some kind of a way to get it a little bit more organized without having like to use like so many currencies left and right. Like have to click like all those omens, unclick all those omens, stuff like that. So I feel like we could need like a little bit more of a better system organizing all these stuff and bringing it stuff to the new people. But besides that, again, big W, really like the crafting. I know I didn't make any crafting guides whatsoever, but you know, other people made it. But I want to work on, for the next league, making the crafting guides also for like the early game builds. So that really, like, if you're like running on day one your early game build and you need like a +3 amulet, you know, here's the way to craft it. Or if you're playing like a lightning arrow character, here's how to quickly craft like a 3 flat ring or stuff like that. So we really get like some guides going how early game crafting works and how easy it is. So that's definitely something I want to do. But yeah, I think I'm saying it for the third time now, crafting at the current state of the game, big W. As for the Ascendancy and class balance, I feel like this is currently the biggest issue the game has. In my opinion, caster characters are just extremely weak at the current iteration. Now you might be saying, wait, like all those blood mages are like completely dominating this league. But that's really just because we have the Undying Hate combination together with the Bloodletting support gem here, which is like completely out of control, but that is going to be removed, or at least significantly nerfed at least like 10 times when we're going into the next league. So if you take that off, and I tried playing characters actually without that, and that really just doesn't feel good. You can play the characters, they will be fine, like, you know, they can do tier 15 maps, they will start struggling on bosses, unless you play like, you know, some kind of lightning conduit or like cast on critical. So I guess bloodmage is a little bit of an exception here, because you can easily reach 100% crit and make like cast on critical builds, which, you know, can spit out like 100 meteors per second technically. So there's kind of these still good builds, but in overall mapping builds, I feel like the caster characters are extremely weak right now, when you take out the overpowered stuff from Atalui's Bloodletting. And then if we compare attack-based builds to these caster builds, the attack-based builds are just 10 times stronger. And they don't use any completely broken interactions. They basically just use regular gear which is in the game. There's not really anything like completely crazy, which is like, you know, giving them a 10x damage like we have on the blood mages right now. And they still easily reach like 500k to 1.5 million DPS while having evasion, while having energy shield, while having 100% movement speed. And they just have like such a great availability of useful gear, like the flat damage on rings. Like for casters, the rings prefixes are basically just useless. You can put like mana, life, or item rarity on there, yeah, but you cannot really put any meaningful stats on there. Same with the glove slot. Like the casters don't really have any good prefixes there, while the attack-based characters can put like big flag damage on there. And there's just so much in the trees that, you know, the caster characters get like 15% increased damage here or there. And, you know, the attack-based characters have just much more damage scaling of the trees. They have like, you know, evasion rating directly goes into damage, accuracy rating goes directly into damage. So many strong notables and stuff like that for the attack-based builds, which casters don't have. And then again, the attack-based builds, at least the evasion-based builds, they start like at a much better place where there's like all the movement speed nodes, and movement speed just being so crucial. Like the bow builds having like the rower mount, which is just completely overpowered. And, you know, casters really don't have anything like that. Yes, right now we have overpowered damage because of the Atalui's Bloodletting, but once that's gone, we're basically down to like, you know, making a 50 to 100k DPS base build, or maybe we can add like some, you know, cast on critical to make it more overpowered, but we're not gonna reach like these crazy interactions. And I was banking on the infusion system to basically be viable, but since that is kind of not really relevant in late game whatsoever, it's not really a good replacement for just the raw power which is giving to attack-based builds. So I really think attack-based builds have to come down at least like 50% on the damage end and a little bit on the survivability end, and caster-based characters probably have to at least be lifted like a little bit on the movement speed end, or maybe, you know, some kind of an, you know, movement ability stuff, and they have to be lifted up on the damage end. Like, we need interactions. Like, if you want to do the infusion mechanics, we need something like, you know, you get 100% increased spell damage per infusion, or you get more damage per infusion, more cast speed per infusion. Give me like a benefit if you have 3 different infusions whatsoever. Like, we need like way more scaling mechanisms together with like the caster mechanics, which the attack-based characters already have. Like, for example, with the energy shield, right? Energy shield is very overpowered compared to life, but it is really just a defensive layer. We don't really get anything from that. But, you know, casters, not casters, attack-based builds basically directly can get damage from evasion. They can directly get damage from accuracy. They can directly get damage from dexterity. So like all their secondary stats also increase the primary stats. And on the intelligence side, it's not really the case. Yes, there's increased damage per maximum mana, increased damage per intelligence, but these nodes are like fairly weak since we cannot reach very high values of these. So yeah, I feel like we just really need more power for casters, and I'm not just saying that because I play caster characters. And if that doesn't change, I'm probably also gonna switch to, like, you know, evasion-based, attack-based characters, because they're just so much stronger, especially when starting a league. And yeah, then we also have like minions, obviously. I think minions are in a great spot right now. They do decent damage. A lot of minion baits seem to be very viable. They are good in the campaign, so I feel like minions are pretty much on spot right now. I like what minions are. Obviously there's performance issues, but besides that, I think minions are in a great spot. And, you know, about strengths characters, like the whole armor archetype, I don't really play that at all. Maybe I will do at some point, but I don't really have an opinion on those. You would have to ask other players which are actually more experienced in that archetype than me. Alright, last thing I want to talk here on the balance end is that items or gear in general is just too powerful compared to the passive tree and also compared to the Ascendancy nodes. Caster characters, for example, can pretty easily get +7, sometimes even +8 skills on just a wand. They can get +3 on a focus. They can up to +4 on an amulet, usually +3. And that's just a huge amount of skill levels. And if you think about that, each skill level for a caster character gives you like roughly 10 to 15% more damage. Basically, like 300% of our entire damage already just comes from skill levels on our gear, which is like technically absurd, because it's literally just one suffix on 3 items is responsible for pretty much 70% of our damage already. So there's like a huge imbalance between the plus skill stat and all other stats, all skill tree, whatever. Like everything you do, it doesn't matter, you don't even have to spec a passive tree. As long as you slap enough skill levels on your gear, you're gonna be outperforming tier 15 maps, no problem. Also right now, the boots can give you up to like 60% movement speeds. Your gloves can give you like 48% attack speed or absurd amounts of cast speed. So these gear slots are just insanely powerful compared to your passive tree. For example, let's take the 48% attack speed gloves. And just compare it to a passive tree, you need to like allocate like 10 to 15 nodes to reach 48% attack speed, and you can just get it on a single piece of gear. There's just a huge imbalance on the, you know, the attack based stuff as well. Also like the breach rings, like the breach ring with the attack modifiers, they are just crazy. You can get like 200 flat damage from a single breach ring, and you know, you can even get 3 of them if you play a ritualist. So there's like such a huge imbalance on these attack based stats as well. And I feel like it just has to significantly come down to give the passive tree more relevancy here. Same goes for example, the jewel slots. Right now we have jewel slots with, for example, the Heart of the Well, which can give us 30% gain damage on just a single jewel slot. We have timeless jewels, which can give us 8% gain per notable, and you can get like 7 to 8 notables. These are like crazy itemization changes, which just give you an absurd amount of damage. And, you know, if you compare that to whatever damage you get from the passive tree, yeah, you pick like a node which has like 10% increased spell damage or 15% increased spell damage. It's just considered something you would never even pass through. So you're basically just passing through to get like the strong notables and get, you know, the jewel slots and get the movement speed. And you completely ignore like any kind of nodes which are actually iconic for playing an ARPG, right? So If it would be a little bit more balanced, that, you know, for example, all the damage stats on gear get like, you know, scaled down by like maybe like 70% or something like that, so like a pretty drastic nerf actually, then, you know, passing through 15% more spell damage instead of 5 intelligence would mean much more. You wouldn't like just stupidly pass on your passive tree to get as much movement speed as possible. No, you might consider getting into damage clusters. Same goes for defenses right now. Gear can have crazy amount of survivability, and the passive tree even augments it. But if the gear had a little bit lower base survivability, then you would actually be tempted to get a little bit more survivability from the passive tree. And that brings me also to the point where Ascendancies have essentially just become stat sticks. So a bloodmage would be iconic for, you know, like it uses life to cast, and it, you know, can leech life with spells and stuff like that. All that stuff doesn't really matter so much. It's pretty much just, yeah, it has 15% base crit, so I can get more damage out of the Ascendancy. A Lich, like we just added an Abyssal Lich, which has an ability to transform Spirit into raw damage. We're pretty much just going to use the Lich like that. And oh yeah, by the way, it has a second, like it has an extra jewel slot, which has double power. So we can just, you know, put like a very good jewel in here, so we basically get more stats. We have like the Ritualist, so why would you play the Ritualist? Like the Ascendancy has absolutely nothing in it but a second ring slot and, you know, additional power for ring slots. What about the Gemling Legionnaire, for example? You know, you get +2 to all skills, and you get like increased scaling of attributes. And, or whatever, the Deadeye, right? Why do you play Deadeye? Well, actually, it's just because it has more movement speed. Like the Ascendancies, there's obviously exceptions to this, but most of the Ascendancies feel like they don't really have like an identity. They're just being used as a stat stick. You just pick the Ascendancy, which gives you the biggest bonus to your damage, the biggest bonus to your stat, the biggest bonus to your movement speed, whatever, but not really anything iconic in the Ascendancy. I guess, you know, there's like a little bit of a difference here if you would play on the strength side of the tree, which I don't really do so much, but besides that, like, it just feels like you'd pick the Ascendancies just for getting additional stats and not really for, you know, the bloodmage is like this cool life caster which, you know, leeches life and, you know, has like a very cool story to it. No, really, you just take it because, oh yeah, there's 15% base crit for spells, and, you know, the Lich has like this awesome mana scaling whatever thing, but no, you don't even play this. The Stormweaver had a very nice identity before because it could like mana stack and had like synergies with mana stacking. Now it's basically just a dead class because it doesn't have any good synergies anymore, so it doesn't offer any stats, it doesn't offer any direct damage increase, so it's not being played anymore. And that's kind of, I would like to have the Ascendancies have more than just stats. I would like them to be reworked into a direction where it actually, you know, defines your gameplay by what Ascendancy you choose, and not, you know, just defines, yeah, you get like another 15% damage by choosing that Ascendancy. Or you balance out Ritualist against Gemling Legionnaire, which one is going to reach more health in the end so I can scale it with my Raspid or whatever. So I would really, really love to see more identity in the Ascendancies here. And that's pretty much what I think about the current league. I think the league was amazing, the league mechanic was amazing. I think we have to still work a lot on class balance. We have to work on itemization and, you know, balancing itemization and passive tree. The crafting is amazing. And yeah, so what am I gonna do like when the next league comes? Obviously we don't know what it's gonna be. You know, I think there's like a probability that we're gonna have Delve. I would really love it to have Delve because that would force us into making defensive characters instead of overpowered DPS based characters. That would definitely be a route I would definitely be interested in playing, more of a defensive way than, you know, just pumping damage and doing maps as fast as possible. But if there's no huge major balance changes for the next iteration of this game, I would probably just either abandon caster characters altogether and go into attack-based characters because they're just much, much better, much more overpowered for league starting, and then, you know, later you could go into other characters if you wanted to, or I might go the minion route because minions seem to be in a pretty solid state. If the next update is gonna have Druid, I'm gonna see if Druid is stuff for me. If there's like Druid casting inside, it might be interesting for me. I would have to look at it, but, you know, most likely I would league start with either, you know, some kind of, not, it's probably not going to be a Deadeye, some kind, but, you know, definitely an attack-based build, like a bow builds, but, you know, maybe Ritualist, maybe Gemling Legionnaire, something like that. Probably not Deadeye because I don't really see like the late game benefit of it so much, to be honest. But, or other way, you know, bloodmage is probably a good Ascendancy. I think sorceress, which is, you know, the character I would like to play most because I really like elemental, like the whole fantasy. I think it's just too weak, like the sorceress character is just too weak right now. It really has nothing to offer. The only viable casters are pretty much Lich, I would say, right now. Maybe Infernalist, maybe, yeah, but mostly Lich and Bloodmage, obviously, because Bloodmage just allows you to play the 100% crit build, which is one of the best ways right now to scale your cast damage, because you can really just use cast on critical to, you know, pump out a ton of spells which you would not be able to cast manually. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking into with future content. I want to make more like into like the crafting. I want to get more into like the, you know, early game, mid game crafting, so to give some more advice how to get the builds going without spending too many divines. But that's kind of the direction I want to go in. But yeah, anyway, so this was kind of, you know, the finish of this league for me. I will do some testing. I want to do some testing without bloodletting. I want to see, you know, what regular caster builds can perform right now without using broken interactions. But, you know, that's going to take some time. So, yeah, anyway, that's it from me for this video. So I'm kind of closing this league. And I thank you for all your support. I thank you so much for watching. And I will be back with the next league. And I hope it's going to be just as good as this one here. Maybe even better, hopefully. If I pick a better starter class to begin with. Stormweaver was a gamble, it didn't pay off. So yeah, I'm really hoping for even more cool stuff for the next league. So yeah, again, thank you so much for watching, and I see you guys next time. Bye.